About a year ago, Spooky Scary Socialist uploaded this video in which he attempts to debunk anti-communist arguments. Now, he says this is every anti-communist argument, but he neglects to bring up any academic argument, things on philosophy or economics. He goes for the absolute weakest arguments possible, and I do disagree with many of these arguments. However, I'm going to tackle the few that I do agree with. First, we'll look at communism is when no food.
The fact that communist countries had famines is mocked again and again, but it ignores the fact that after these famines, countries like the Soviet Union and China accomplished food security for the rest of their existence. A study called Economic Development, Political Economic System and Physical Quality of Life compares socialist and capitalist countries based on different levels of development, looking at the physical quality of life of both. Data for the study was taken from the World Development Report of the World Bank. Shockingly, it found the daily per capita calorie supply was actually higher in socialist countries than those of capitalist ones.
This is a common study cited by Socialist, and it's a really bad one. I already made a debunking of this study, so I suggest you go and watch that. Basically, they use bad data, they call socialist countries capitalist, and they blame socialist failures on capitalism repeatedly. And in my video, I provide around 200 counter studies. So with that being said, let's continue.
I also want to add that if you're skeptical of that study I showed, the CIA itself acknowledged that American and Soviet citizens eat about the same amount of food each day, but that the Soviet diet is more nutritious. Hopefully that completely satisfies anyone who still thinks everyone's starved under communism.
Now we're going to get back to this CIA report, but first there's a few more things I should cover. Between 1924 and 1934, over 290,000 tractors were added to Soviet agriculture. This is because of the US. Tractors came from the US and Russia copied tractors from the US. In other words, the Russian agricultural sector was built on the success of American capitalists. On top of that, there was still an existing private sector in Soviet agriculture. Despite making up 3% of agriculture, they produced 43% of the vegetables, 40% of the meat, 39% of the milk, and 66% of the eggs. Holy crap, I really love being a capitalist because I get to find information like this that proves me right, and it is glorious. This tiny little private sector was so much more productive than the entire public sector. The Soviet Union's tiny little bit of capitalism was its biggest strength. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough. The Soviet Union still encountered major problems with food. First, let's go back to this guy's citation. This summary here. This is not the actual report. I should point that out. This is just a summary. I don't know who wrote it or anything about it. It's a really bad summary. Now here is the actual report with the data. The important thing to mention here, which was not in that really bad summary, is that this is food supply, not food ingestion. It says that food ingestion was much lower because of losses. It also says that they had a hard time fulfilling consumer preferences. Wow, if only someone would have predicted that and known that was going to happen. I really wish someone warned us. Anyways, back to the CIA data. Another problem here is they still overestimate Soviet food supply. The CIA was notoriously bad at collecting data on the Soviet Union, as pointed out by people like John Wilhelm. In his paper, Wilhelm brings up Igor Berman, who was a Soviet economist who heavily criticized the way the CIA gathered data. Douglas McKagan also wrote a paper specifically attacking the CIA and how they gathered data in the Soviet Union. Now let's go back to Igor Berman, and specifically his book, Personal Consumption in the USSR and the USA. Overall, his data showed that the USSR was lower in quality and mostly lower in quantity, with the one exception of alcoholic beverages. Now for the sake of argument, let's pretend the Soviet Union's caloric intake was exactly the same as the US's. This would not mean quality of life would be on par because Soviet citizens demanded a much higher caloric intake. The reasons for this is they had a younger population in a much harsher and colder climate with much more demanding labor.
I've already dealt with the topic of death counts, specifically concerning Stalin, in a previous video. Needless to say, when scholars looked at actual archival evidence released from the Soviet Union, they found that death counts were actually much lower than what was previously estimated. The paper, Victims of the Soviet Penal System in the Pre-War Years, found that many of the previous estimates of historians were based on guesses, rumors, or extrapolations from isolated local observations.
Has anyone ever noticed if you just insert Holocaust into these arguments, these people will literally just sound exactly like Nazis? In a later part of his video, he actually makes fun of people who compare him to Nazis, but bro, you're citing a debunked paper by historical revisionists. Yeah, okay. Anyways, here's a wonderful response by Stephen Roosevelt that was published 4 years after the original paper's publication. Roosevelt found at least 5.2 million excess deaths, a far greater amount than the 2 million proposed by the original paper. Now, even if it was 2 million, this isn't a flex. If your man killed 2 million people, that's not a good thing. And it's really odd that you feel the need to debunk these types of numbers. Oh, actually it wasn't 4.2 million, it was 2 million. Yeah, okay. There's not much difference at this point. It's a very high number.
Wow, look at that. Breadlines for the hungry people under communism. How shameful. This is obviously proof that communism doesn't— Wait a second. These are pictures from the Great Depression, a failure stemming from capitalism.
So in this guy's attempt to debunk the claim that commies are bad at economics, he immediately makes an economic fallacy. Wow, yeah, great going there, buddy. Great going. The Great Depression was caused by the Federal Reserve shrinking the money supply. Ben Bernanke, a Federal Reserve board member, admitted this back in 2002. The Great Depression was also exacerbated by things like the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. A national bank and tariffs are not capitalist. They're exactly the opposite. In fact, it was Karl Marx who advocated for the national banks that caused these situations. Anyways, with all these points being made, I think I'll stop right there. Please send me more suggestions of videos you want me to debunk. Also, as usual, in the description I have sources and citations, plus a few additional resources to check out.